Right. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we're going to be talking about phytotoxicity and how it's caused, how it's managed. And without further ado, we'll get started. So we're going to split it up, the webinar, into 4 sections. And there's a short delay between when I hit the button and when you get it, so I'll just try and keep that in mind. So we've got a Levy-funded project that goes for 5 years, and it's not just doing webinars, we're doing a variety of different activities, and so we'll cover very briefly what's involved in that. Then we're going to talk about what causes phytotoxicities, how it's managed, and steps to diagnose unknown plant problems, because sometimes recognizing a phytotoxicity is actually a little bit difficult, and disentangling them, it's good to be able to disentangle what your problem is. Okay, so the Nursery Project covers the production of many resources, so fact sheets, pest management plans. We have discounted diagnostics for all production nurseries. NIAS accredited nurseries get free samples, about 10 per year. We are running workshops in each state and territory each year of the project, and we also are running these webinars. There's also biosecurity support to industry, which is mainly around policy for when there are incursions, and also biosecurity preparedness, so in preparing for critical pests that would be significant to the nursery industry. So I'm just going to jump over to the FMS website. If you could, hopefully the raising of hands works or starts to work through the workshop, but if you've been to this website, then please raise your hand. What I'm going to do is just go to the technical information page, the one that's grayed out, and there are topics and resources from a variety of there's lots of resources on a lot of different topics. The project that we have falls into mainly the pests and diseases section, and you can see here that there are pest and disease fact sheets. So some of the other different resources are here, and you can go to those fact sheets, and here are some of the fact sheets. And these are specifically written for the Australian production nursery industry. So they are quite valuable, and we have a lot of people that read them and go, oh, wow, this is great. This is everything we need to start off the management of whatever problem it is. Okay, so I'm going to just jump back to the webinar. So that website is quite handy, and it's being developed. It's a relatively new website with resources there it's becoming more populated, I should say. Okay, so first section is, what is phytotoxicity? What are the factors that cause a phytotoxicity, phytotoxic reaction? So in a broad sense, phytotoxicity is normally thought about as a reaction by plants caused by something, a plant protection product. We can broaden that a little bit. I think it's useful to think about it as injury from something that we have done as a manager of plants. So whether it be from too much fertilizer or the growing media properties or water properties that can potentially cause a reaction that damages the plants. I might just add that we're going to have some photos here. Given that the nursery industry is so big in terms of the diversity of plants, there's no possible way that we can cover all phytotoxic reactions. So what we're doing is providing representative images that are fairly typical, as well as some that are maybe a little left field, to give you an idea that sometimes it's easy to recognize a phytotoxic reaction, and other times it's kind of a bit obscure. Okay, so these are some of the the typical ones that will pop up on your screen in a moment. So it's caused by fungicides and insecticides. You'll often get these interveinal sort of spots or vein clearing, or sometimes it just removes the chlorophyll from the cells, causing a whitening. Herbicides, it will pop up in a moment, typically cause this middle image here, causes a deformity of the growth, but it's not always that. Sometimes you can get necrosis or just cupping or a chlorotic sort of reaction, particularly with your growth regulators. Okay, nutrient toxicities can cause quite a wide range of symptoms, depending on the plant and depending on the specific nutrient that you're dealing with. So sometimes you can have necrotic reactions. Oftentimes that is the case, but sometimes, you guys know your plants. So really, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with nutrients, but it's just to highlight that nutrient toxicities do occur. And here on the right here, we have avocados where chicken manure was actually applied and it just burnt it and ringbarked the plants. They're pretty dead. Okay, so low pH and EC, which we'll talk about in a moment, or we actually touched on briefly before, can cause a variety of symptoms as well, from deformity to similar symptoms to a pesticide application. So we've talked about some of these factors, and now from a specific factor point of view, the symptoms that they cause. Now we're going to talk generally about some of the different symptoms that they can cause. And in general, the symptoms that are caused by phytotoxicity can be summarized into about 4 main categories. So burn, necrosis, whether you get spots or lesions, like in this middle section, or a chlorosis, interveinal chlorosis, which can look similar to nutrient deficiency, but in this case, it's from a product that's been applied. Sometimes even ethylene. So in the bromeliads, ethylene are put on to promote even flowering, and it's sometimes that can cause some spots, or the thought to cause some spots. It can also cause deformity of growth. So these 2 images on the right are suspected to have been caused by water, a water problem where we don't know exactly what caused it, but we've pinpointed that it was definitely water because all the other factors we've ruled out. And so you can see the cupping, there was even this woody growth. It was acting as a growth regulator effectively. And at first, that's what we thought it was, but it just didn't make sense with the symptoms. And that's part of the reason we're going to talk later about diagnosing problems generally, so that you can rule out different factors and make new theories and come to a better conclusion. Other abnormal growth can occur where you have root damage, poor germination, and this on the left here where there's herbicide, it's typical, and it can sometimes be mistaken for virus infection, in fact. Viruses get blamed quite a lot, and in fact, and for that reason, we actually produced a whole webinar on virus infection, virus symptoms, virus management. And when we send out some follow-up email, I'll include that link where this webinar will also be located on the NGIA YouTube channel. Okay, so we're going to do a quick poll, John, if you wouldn't mind.
Yep. Launching it.
Yes, please.
So just how often do you encounter symptoms that you think are phytotoxicity? So just click either almost never, maybe once a year or less, occasionally, but maybe up to 4 times a year, or fairly frequently every month, which means that you're doing something terribly wrong. So if you just like to click on one of those, and we'll see how we go. A couple more seconds to go, and we'll close it off and see how we went. Okay, might close it and share the results. So most of you haven't seen much of phytotoxicity, but some do see it occasionally. So yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, I'll just hide that.
Thank you, John.
Right.
So just because, as John said, sometimes phytotoxicity can occur, sometimes it can occur on a regular basis, and it can be quite difficult to disentangle. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being it doesn't necessarily mean that you're totally at fault. It just means that you got to work through the problem. Anyway, oops, I went too fast. Here we go. Okay, so phytotoxicity, as you probably are aware, can interact with other factors and cause a problem, a more severe reaction. So if you apply a product at high temperature, most people are aware, raise your hand if you can, if you're aware, high temperature and putting on a fungicide or a pesticide is a recipe for phytotoxicity. Okay, that's fairly, and the same with water-stressed plants. Yep, thank you. Sorry that it's the first time that we've had people have problems raising their hands. I'm not sure why that's the case, but water temperature, stressed plants tends to promote a phytotoxic reaction, and sensitive crop lines. We all know that there are lines of plants that you just avoid spraying whenever you possibly can because they're more susceptible, more sensitive. And the same different stages of different plants can be more sensitive. So as you become more familiar with plant varieties and species, then you can gauge the boundaries, if you like, of what you can apply and what you can't and when. Now, as I was doing research for this webinar, I came across leaf wetness as an interacting factor where if you have wet leaves with the product, so if you applied your product and they stay wet with your product for a relatively long period of time, you can increase the risk of causing a phytotoxic reaction. And the reason behind that is the different ingredients in the product have a longer period of time to react with the leaf, whereas when that leaf is dry, when the product is dry on the leaf, they're less reactive to the leaf. They can still be reactive in terms of the target, whether it's be a fungicide, a pesticide, or whatever, but at least in some cases, they can still be reactive when they're dry, but it's less reactive to the plant surface and less likely to cause a reaction to the cells when the product is dry on the leaf. And humidity is linked to that, where it just takes a longer period of time for that product to dry. So that's a problem, I would, particularly in humid areas and perhaps in protective cropping. If you've got a particularly humid environment, then that's something that you might need to manage. And we'll talk about management more in a moment. So other interactive factors where you have a combination of pesticides. We all know wetting agents and adjuvants, they can be very useful, but you have to realize that if you're combining products, they can interact with each other in such a way that you may be more at risk of a phytotoxicity. Now, paraquat, as you probably recognize, is a herbicide, and it's unlikely that you'll be applying that to your nursery crop, I hope. But the image here is just to illustrate paraquat by itself versus adding a surfactant, you had a much stronger reaction with the surfactant than without. Sulfur and oil products. Has anyone been unfortunate to apply sulfur and oil within about 3 weeks of each other, or with heat? Raise your hand if you have. Those sorts of things are a high risk in terms of producing a phytotoxic reaction. Okay, so for the formulation itself, there are some products, as you're probably aware, that have, let's say, an EC, so emulsifiable concentrate, whereas others may be a dust or wettable powders. And there are other formulations out there as well. Different formulations of the same active ingredient can have different risk of producing a phytotoxicity. So typically, emulsifiable concentrates are higher risk, and the reason for that is because emulsions are a combination of an oil and water. So to get the oil and the water soluble products to combine in a way so that they are evenly applied to the crop, they have to put in solvents into it so that it becomes a mix that's mixed. Hopefully that makes sense. Because there are those solvents there's a higher risk of having the solvent effectively react to the plant cells. And that will also it's related then to what we were talking about earlier. With a longer period of time being wet on the leaf, you're more likely to get those solvents to have a reaction on the leaf. Hopefully that makes sense. You can ask a question. You can even type in questions now in anticipation for the questions that are going to be in a moment, if you'd like. And then high product concentration. I think most people that are regularly using pesticides are aware that a high product concentration, if you double or triple or miscalculate and add an extra zero on the end of your product, and when you're adding it into your tank, you're more likely to have a phytotoxic reaction. I think John can say something about that if he would like. And do we have questions?
Andrew, that information you were talking about with regards humidity and water on the leaves.
Yes.
One question is, did it mention any specific products that are known to cause that sort of problem?
Look, even if I knew off the top of my head specific products, I'd be reluctant to target them because it's not just the product that's the issue. It's the interaction between the product, the environment, the crop line that you're applying it to. I mean, your succulent plants, and there are a whole slew of different plants that are relatively susceptible or sensitive to different products. And most growers, maybe if you would like to type into the questions area those plants that you grow that you know are sensitive, that would be lovely. Those plants that if you're going to get a phytotoxic reaction, those are the plants that you're most likely to see it on. I think that that covers it, doesn't it, John?
Yep. And
Primula, thank you, Ashley.
Just another question. How quickly does phytotoxicity symptoms actually show up if you were to spray your plants with a pesticide? How quickly would you expect symptoms to appear?
Yep. That is another one where it sort of depends. It depends, let's say, on the environmental conditions you're dealing with. Let's say you were dealing with ideal environmental conditions and you just had a sensitive plant and a product. Maybe you didn't have time to do some testing to see if there would be a phytotoxic reaction, and you've applied it hoping for the best. Generally, you would expect them to appear within 3 to 7 days. Probably more likely within the 3 days. It depends on how fast that plant grows. So more fast-growing plants are more likely to show that reaction more quickly than plants that are more slow-growing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's all for the moment, I think, Andrew. I think we can keep going.
All right. Well,
I'm not going to tell my story.
All right. No worries. Yeah. Fair enough. All right. So if you have questions through the webinar, just type them in to John, and then when the next question, Einstein, appears, we can go through those questions. All right. So the next section is on how to manage phytotoxicity and factors causing similar symptoms. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, these next 3 slides, you'll have to forgive me. They are a little bit wordy, but it's only 3 slides, and hopefully you'll be able to manage. And really, these management actions fall out of the factors causing phytotoxicity. It's not rocket science. It's fairly obvious. Most clever production nursery managers will, once they realize high heat can increase the risk of a phytotoxicity, then you know to apply your products in moderate conditions, in that Goldilocks zone, so to speak, where you don't have a high temperature, you don't have a low temperature, it's just right. And the same applies to your drying conditions, so that you want not super high heat so that it dries and is more likely to cause a phytotoxic reaction, but just right in terms of the conditions that allow the product to dry naturally. Never apply to wilted or water-stressed plants. That's a big no-no. Read the label before you're buying new products. Do some research. I'm thinking I want to buy this product. Look at what other people say. There are heaps of forums online that you can look at to see if the types of crops you grow are likely to be affected, and use that to make an educated decision over which products to buy and which ones not to buy. Go to workshops in your local area. Talk to other growers that are growing similar crop lines and say, oh, what do you use for those aphids? What do you use for fungal leaf spots? And gather information in that way. Does anyone apply aerosols to their crops? So aerosol formulations. If you do, just write a little note. If you do apply an aerosol formulation, there's research been conducted that indicates the closer you are to the crop with your aerosol, the more likely you are to have a phytotoxic reaction. So the closer you can get, the better, but 45 centimeters is about the right distance to have a low risk of phytotoxicity, but also get your product onto the crop, assuming that there's not much wind or onto the plant, let's say. So what happens is the propellant itself can be phytotoxic. So the further you have to have it that distance away, so the propellant dissipates, but your product gets on the crop. Okay. So manage your sprayers. Who calibrates their sprayer equipment regularly, like as in at least once a year? If you're putting on product at the wrong rate, then you're more likely to get a phytotoxic reaction if you put too much product on, particularly. And as we've indicated, if symptoms develop and become more severe after 7 to 10 days, then you might want to think about submitting a sample for diagnostic testing. Maybe there's something more sinister going on and you want to rule that out. Because sometimes you can have plant diseases that have very similar symptoms to a burn or a phytotoxic reaction. Okay, who tests new products and mixes before they apply it to the whole crop? Hopefully some of you do. The idea is to get a small number of plants of your sensitive species, so those species that you grow, get a few plants of those susceptible lines, and when you get your new product, apply your products 3 or 4 times with a 3 to 7 day interval. There are some products out there that might have increased risk of a phytotoxic reaction with reapplication. So the idea is that you apply the product a number of times, and then you can have more certainty that you aren't going to have a phytotoxic reaction. And when you do that, it's best to try and do it at a similar environmental conditions, just so that you don't have as many variables to interact and make it difficult to interpret your results. Okay. So factors that can cause similar symptoms: burn. While it's sometimes a phytotoxic reaction, other times it can just be environmental conditions. It can often appear similar, very similar, and it's probably a similar reaction in the plant. Edema. Some of you will have encountered edema in tumescence, which is effectively where those cells have received more water than they can get rid of. And the symptoms can be quite variable. Different plants can produce slightly different symptoms, where it's often like this gall-like symptom. The cells have blown up, and then sometimes they can actually burst and become sunken. So those factors where typically if you have a hot day, the water gets pumped from the roots into the leaves. Then if you have a cool night, the plant may think, okay, I'm pumping water because it's hot. I'm pumping water, and all of a sudden it's cold. The transpiration can be reduced dramatically, and those cells become too full of water. Other scenarios can be light conditions. If the light conditions are right, the plant can go, I need to put water through to the leaves, but in fact the transpiration level is relatively low compared to the water that is going to the leaf, and it can cause that edema. So different plants can have edema from different factors. So these are just a couple of examples of how it can look, and a couple of examples of scenarios that can result in it. But it can often it can often look similar to a burn, and sometimes similar to a leaf spot pathogen particularly. Other factors that can cause similar symptoms are pests, and the next slide will be diseases. So broad mites can often be similar to a wide variety of different other problems, particularly virus infection. Because they are very small and cryptic, they can be easily missed and cause a curling of the leaves, and if in high infestations, the leaves can drop and look like a burn. I really like this next example that will pop up in a moment. Here we are. Who grows kangaroo paws? Does anyone grow kangaroo paws? If you can type in yes, that'd be awesome. In this case, on the right-hand side, you have a copper toxicity. Now, ironically, the rust that can occur on kangaroo paw, it's managed by copper, or one of the ways of managing it is copper. And if you don't look carefully enough and you just see black spots and think, oh, there's rust there, I better put on some more copper, then you can then have that circular situation in which the copper the toxicity can become worse and worse, and you can become your own worst enemy, so to speak. Yeah, okay, at least one person has had this, grows kangaroo paw. That's great. So be aware that you've got to be careful in looking at your symptoms and not just blame one. Don't just blame phytotoxicity, but work it through. In the next section, we'll talk about that more. Okay, the last factor, which can look similar, that we'll talk about is genetic mutations. So on the left here, we have passion fruit. Superficially, this can look similar to a plant that has had, let's say, a growth regulator or some sort of a herbicide damage. But in fact, in this case, it wasn't. It was most likely just the genetics of that particular plant. Sometimes you get these reversions and the plants just don't grow right, and they'll never grow right, even if you've never applied anything to them. Similarly, this is a genetic disorder in a squash. Through a breeding program, they found that some lines just had this vein clearing, and that can look similar to a whole range of different symptoms. It's often misdiagnosed for a nutrient disorder or even a product that's been applied to the crop. So sometimes it's tricky. Okay, so we'll stop. There's a logical stopping point. If you have any questions, please type them through.
Andrew, I think the only one which is really been raised is with regards to forums that you discussed. Can you give more details on that? I'm not familiar with them myself, because but perhaps you have had issues with them.
Well, I thought that I had come across them when just doing general searches. However, what I'll do is search more specifically, and when I send out the follow-up email, I'll put a couple examples there or make an apology if I've actually made a mistake.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, so I think that's the only one that really came up. I think you're covering a lot of information at the moment, so yeah, I guess we can just keep going.
We'll keep on moving, and if we finish up early, that's fine too. I'm all right with that. Okay, so steps to diagnose unknown plant problems is the next section. And this is similar to a talk that I gave at the National Nursery Conference. I've sort of mixed it up a little bit and tweaked it specifically for this topic. The first thing to do when you're diagnosing an unknown problem is to look at the patterns in the crop. In particular, is the whole crop affected? Excuse me. Or is it just the odd plant here and there? Okay, so if your whole crop is affected, then I realize that it sounds really obvious, but if the whole crop is affected, it means that the plants are being affected by a factor that's occurring on the entire crop. And that in itself gives you clues as to the type of causal agent that could be happening. In general, pathogens or living organisms, whether it be insects or mites or a plant disease, in general, they don't occur to the entire crop. If you think about it like a medieval town, and my apologies if you've heard this analogy before, if you think of a medieval village, okay, the village might have one well in the center of town generally, and that's sort of the lifeblood of that medieval village. Okay, if someone, sorry, I'll back up. If you've got that medieval town and a pathogen, let's say a plague comes through, you'll get a proportion of the people that gets affected. Maybe some of them die. Generally, you don't have all people affected. Maybe you have a higher proportion, 50%, that's pretty high in general. But in general, you don't have everyone die or affected. Whereas if you have that well and someone poisons the well, Everyone's getting water from it. Everyone can be affected. Okay, so does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Just sing out if it doesn't. So that's why we think about it. Abiotic factors, whether it be from a phytotoxicity, something that you've done to the crop, or environmental conditions, or a growing media, or the water supply, whatever, it affects whole crop lines, whereas pathogens tend to hit one or two plants or a proportion of plants, okay? So the next thing to do, in my opinion, is to look at the plants closely. You start to see a symptom, look at it closely. Look at the growing tip. Sometimes you can have very small insects or mites present in those crops. And with a hand lens, you just don't see them. But with a dissecting microscope, if you could type in, if you have an actual microscope that you use to look at growing tips or other parts of the plants, that'd be great. If you can, with the magnification, you can see what happens to be there. And if there's nothing there, that's great. There's no evidence of the pest there, because sometimes if you become more familiar enough with pests, you can even see evidence of, let's say, broad mites with cast-off skins and eggs and stuff like that. That gives you more clues that it's not something in the growing tips. Look at the roots. I find it disturbing the number of times I have conversations with growers and I ask them, okay, what do the roots look like? And they go, oh, I haven't looked at the roots. I go, well, can you go and look at the roots and get back to me? The number of times we have growers send in above plant parts and we start doing testing and you go, there's no pathogen here, can you send whole plants? And then we find that there's actually a root pathogen. There's a reason why we say, please look at your roots. Be regularly looking at your root health. If you don't have healthy roots, the whole plant suffers. And the same goes for the vascular tissue. The vascular tissue, it's like your veins. If you've got a blockage in your veins, bad things happen to you. The plant, if you have a problem in the stem where the water supply and the nutrient supply moving up and down the plant is broken, your plant dies. Okay, and steps 2 and 3, they can, in fact, 1, 2, and 3, you can sort of do all 3 of these at the same sort of time. It's interchangeable. Look at your crop history. We highly recommend you have your crop health monitored regularly and record it electronically so that it's easy to search by crop. I'd say in a spreadsheet or in a database, if you've got a database. Some people do build their own databases if they have someone that's clever with IT, but a spreadsheet can work quite well and it's searchable. So in this case here, we have one crop line. It's one variety of bougainvillea. And what you can see is at week 46, they started to get this deformed growth. Week 49, it's still present. But at week 51, it's gone. That sort of series of events helps you disentangle the type of factor that can be affecting your crop. So between that time period, in that time period, something was happened. And that's how, in this case, we did narrow it down to the water supply, different areas of the nursery with different water supplies were and weren't affected, as the case may be. And there was an event for a period of about a month where the water, without any real indication, it just wasn't suitable for these particular plants. So that's an illustration of examining your crop history to help you look at symptom development and disentangle the factor. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. This one, it sounds really obvious, but it's another case where look at what the plant needs, do some searching online. For some crops, it's easy. For those crops that have been researched, particularly overseas, let's say in Europe, where the flowers and the various different crop lines can be have been well characterized, I should say. It's easy to find information on the level of light that provides optimum growth, nutrients, water, growing media. But then when you start looking at some of our native Australian plants, there's sometimes no information out there. And you have to be a researcher in some cases, which leads to the next steps. You have to disentangle and you have to work out what growing conditions are the best to grow this plant or to propagate the cuttings or to get the seeds to germinate. So know what the plant needs, write it down. Don't let one nursery manager just have it in their head and then something happens and they leave and then you're left back at square one. Put together some documents, particularly for those plants those crop lines that are tricky and that don't have information pre-prepared online. Put it together for your nursery so that it's easy. Okay, so then you use all those first four steps to build some simple theories. And really the simple theories are the best ones because they're the ones that are most likely to occur. So if you're getting poor germination, first of all, if you've got heated benches, make sure that the heated benches are actually on. We have come across situations where that hasn't been the case, and it's actually quite simple. If you start modifying, you're changing your irrigation, it hasn't been turned back on. So start simple, examine all of your basic assumptions. Once you've ticked all those boxes, then start maybe make theories that are slightly more complicated. And you can list them relatively quickly just by using some basic logic, rule some things out based on the factors that you've seen. If you're seeing symptoms in your garden and in the crop plants, well, make sure that the garden and the crop plants in your nursery are actually the same problem. Sometimes they're not, and we've come across situations that people have been really confused, and then when you examine that assumption, you go, actually, your garden plants, it's a completely different problem. You can manage it that way. Now let's look at the real problem, and everything becomes clarified. Okay, so once you have those simple theories in place, you can start testing those theories. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. You don't actually have to be a scientist. I really love going to nurseries and go, oh yeah, we did this little test. We've got a simple LED light system in this corner. We're sort of trying it out, seeing if we can get the plant growth to be faster, so we can the turnaround time is quicker. If we get better growth with different crop lines. And sometimes we say, yeah, it works for this plant, but it doesn't work for these other plants. In this picture here, this was a pre-emergent herbicide applied on the right, no pre-emergent herbicide on the left. It doesn't have to be rocket science, and the results can be quite stunning. You can see there are no phytotoxic reactions. On the right, the plants are growing great. They're exactly the same, other than the fact that the ones on the left have a lot more weeds. Okay, so who does this sort of thing? Who does little nursery trials? Hopefully some people do. We'll keep on going, and hopefully you can type something in, and we have this poll which is related anyway.
Okay, let's launch it. So which of these steps that we've just been talking about have you used to decide what has caused your symptoms? So just tick on the ones that you've done, and we'll quickly see who actually does what. So whether you assess a pattern of symptoms, crop history, so keeping really good records, whether you cut your plants up, check the roots, and know exactly what your plants require, and then just theorise as to what the problem might be. So, how are we going? Maybe a couple more seconds. Get a few more takers. Okay.
If you have any questions, yep. And
we'll share it. So those that responded, certainly all of you do assess for patterns of symptoms, and same with assessing plant requirements and dissecting plants, which is really good. That you're actually looking at what's inside the plants. So, no, that's excellent. Okay, we'll hide that.
That's good.
Right.
Great. So we're just about done. If you have any final questions, I realise that this webinar in some ways to me it seems really straightforward, but it's just a matter of packaging your information in a way that suits phytotoxicity, and hopefully you found it helpful.
We do have one
any
question,
final
Andrew,
questions, John?
You might just want to elaborate on one that I responded to about brown leaf tips on peace lilies watered with tap water indoors. I've put it down to possibly the fact that the plants are actually being overwatered. They're not being allowed time to dry, the pots to dry out between waterings, and so they're showing symptoms on the leaves. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, so we're talking about plants that might be in people's houses or in offices, maybe but to do with like renting out plants, I presume.
I would think so, yeah.
It's possible. It's hard to say. As soon as you start having plants indoors, if they're not treated quite right, I mean, people in offices, I'm guilty myself of not looking after my indoor plants very well, and then you can start having, I remember to water the plants when they start falling over, and that sort of thing could easily interact and start having a combination of too much water and not enough water, causing your browning of the leaf tips. So, and perhaps even if they've been in the office for too long without the nutrients coming through, or if they're just not being watered evenly enough, then perhaps your slow release fertilizer isn't coming. I think there are a whole raft of different possibilities there, and the chlorine may be one of them. To be honest, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just knowing a little bit more about those particular plants and how well they should perform indoors and what requirements they actually do need. Okay. So I don't think we've got any more questions. Unless anyone's got anything now.
So thanks for joining us. Yeah, I couldn't resist sticking that picture in.
You got to pick the monkey or the ape.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. Anyway, I'll send out a survey either today or tomorrow to all the registrants. If you wouldn't mind completing that survey, that'd be great. And I'll also put some of the links in that email that were relevant to our webinar. And otherwise, you can send us some emails if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
So, thanks everyone for attending. Talk to you later. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.